proposition, social ecology. In what type of social ecology this argument has emerged? And what are the currents in this social ecology that have really forced me to look into? There are many international as well as national, but I'm just trying to quote here at least 4 very important or very pressing narratives which have really forced me to think that yes, there is a need to evolve a perspective. To begin with, this narrative comes from caste is a modern phenomenon, a product of encounter between India and Western rule. Although he adds that he is not implying that caste was invented by British, but he also emphasized colonialism made caste what it is today. Now, I have written how this proposition is methodologically, epistemologically, and empirically erroneous. I have written this in my book, Caste and Democracy in India. If you want, you can read. But what I felt that I could not write at that time, that this statement is not ethically neutral also. If you really are actually decreasing the history of caste, the reification of caste, you are reducing the history of caste only to colonial period. That means you are, reducing the type of exploitation, exclusion, and the long history suffered by 250,000 of population of India. And therefore, for me, ethically, that is not correct, actually, to look at this type of argument. And therefore, friends, there are methodological and epistemological and theoretical problematics which have to be engaged with if you really want to understand. The second motivation for me to write this is the metaphors which have been used by certain philosophers or writers, especially like can subaltern speak, the metaphor, or India's silent revolution, and second revolution, and so on and so forth. My problem is this, that if you reread the history of Indian society, then I think these metaphors, they can be deconstructed very easily. Especially when I look at, as a sociologist, when I start rereading the Indian history, even from formless, the saint poets of the formless god. If you take Nirgun Shakha, that actually, if you start reading it there, I think the people who are proposing these metaphors, I think they have not taken into consideration how the medieval ages saint poets were exalted, or the medieval ages or colonial period, the community social reformers of the marginalized sections, they have been raising their voice, or the autobiographies which were written later on, and they also try to retrieve the history of the lived experience. So in that, actually, the discourses which were created from the medieval ages, if we take note of it and we reread, I think these metaphors get, deconstructed. The third reason to engage this perspective is, I quote from Gopal Guru, and he writes, certain groups like the Dalits who did not form the part of organic labor process ultimately failed to develop an intellectual capacity to reflect. By and large, they were always kept outside of such a social context. Generation after generation, they were pushed into occupations that were completely devoid of any possibility of innovation and imagination, and hence were not impregnated with the possibility of knowledge. For example, they were pushed regularly into the occupations like scavenging, sanitation, and other type of manual labor, which had inherent limitations in prompting them for doing anything extraordinary in terms of creating knowledge. It is hilarious for me to read, as if that some racist argument is being made, and it is being published in the mainstream journal called Economic and Political Weekly. It is blasphemous even to recover these types of argument, but you can't do anything because certain people are in the privileged position and they can write actually and then get published. There are no gatekeepers for them. The last argument which I want to present is this. Certain people have written volumes on particular population without defining the contours of the population. What type of population, what are their characteristics, but they can write a book. And not only that, what will be their subject matter? And they have produced studies, and I am referring Dalit studies. Dalit studies without what is the population, what is the subject matter, what are the characteristics of the subject matter, and what perspective with which they will engage the population. Nothing is there, and yet there is the book Dalit Studies published by mainstream publisher. Not here, but also abroad. Now, if you look the examples which I have put, this is not only in India. I have examples from abroad as well, and you can take these examples if you want, which really intrigue me. The first, the biography Alex Haley's Roots. Alex Haley's, and it is a 6th-generation family story. The second, of course, is George Ballandier's The Sociology of Black Africa, how he has rejected the mainstream functionalist perspective and tries to argue that we have to engage with traditionalism. And traditionalism is not a monolithic whole. There are 4 types of tradition that we have to engage with if you really want to understand the Black Africa. These traditionalisms are fundamental traditions, formal traditionalism, the traditionalism of resistance, and pseudo-traditionalism. These 4. Not only that, you look at Morris D. Eldon and his book, recent book, The Scholar Denied, W.E.B. Du Bois and the Birth of Modern Sociology. You can also look at Joyce A. Lender, which I have been giving you, Death of White Sociology. Death of White Sociology, and how sociology has been racist. They are trying to argue. How Robert Park has been considered as father of American sociology rather than W.E.B. Du Bois, who actually wrote his first work, The Philadelphia Negro, in 1899, and did ethnographic work, and he is not considered. So, Decoding Ambedkar and somewhere actually Scholar Denied resembles there as well. And last one is the Patricia Hills Collins. Nobody talks about Patricia as an American sociologist who talks about race, class, and gender, especially the Black feminist thought. And I really like the statement which she makes actually, that developed knowledge is rooted in lived experience, not in abstract theory. And also, she tried to gain the knowledge through the functionaries, the nannies, the maids, and the cooks, the Black women who were there actually, and they tried to contribute the insights of the contradiction of the white life, the way they lived, and inside the family how they lived. What was the contradiction? And from there she started bringing the insights. And this can be added by Joyce Lender's argument that if the sufferers do their research, is it objective? It is being actually always scoffed at. Oh, you are biased. But she tries to argue that no, you can take the case not of biasness, but it is basically double consciousness. I am black as well as I am doing a research. So it's not actually a biasness, rather it is a question of double consciousness. I am much more ingrained to study that. Now these are few currents, friends, from India as well as abroad that force me that why this happens that only the marginalized sections studies. Their values, their objectivity is not measured. Why actually people have not raised the questions on these and they are given as mainstream studies. Therefore, friends, I thought that there's a need to revisit these subject matter, but the perspective will be different. And this perspective, of course, is a universalistic type of perspective. I'm talking about a perspective that you can add the population which you like. But right now, because I have the examples from blacks, Dalits, women, as well as actually, tribes, so you can look at that subaltern perspective is emerging. But I'm not saying that this is a perspective. But what I'm trying to argue, that how the marginalized have been not given an agency to evolve their own perspective. As if that, as people will say that no, they did not have any knowledge to reflect upon. Or some people said that no, it has been actually, they can never speak. Can they speak is not a problem. But the question is, can they listen? That is the question. Therefore, friends, I want to actually draw, philosophical basis for evolving this perspective from the generic basis as has been evolved by many others. But I have tried to look from beginning, actually I make it from Descartes. I begin with Descartes because Descartes is of the opinion that the existence of individual is because they have the capacity to think. They have the capacity to think. Now somebody was telling that they did not produce any, reflections. There was no reflectivity. And here is Descartes who is saying that everyone has the capacity to think. And that's why they exist. Not only that, if you read Descartes with Irving Zetlin and Ted Benton, they are trying to argue that individuals are not only having thinking power, but they also have the power to differentiate between good reason and bad reason. To differentiate between good reason and bad reason. So it is nature which endows every individual to differentiate between good reason and bad reason. Now, why actually the people who have been living on the marginalized way, why can't they have the capacity? That is my question. And therefore, I really think Descartes bails us out to look at that, yes, everybody has the capacity to think. Now, when I was reading this paper somewhere else, so people argued me, okay, you are talking about, I think, why don't you start with Nietzsche? Why don't you start with Nietzsche? And Nietzsche says, and I quote, I am, therefore I think. I am, therefore I think. Now, in his work Beyond Good and Evil, some 250 years later when Descartes actually proposed his proposition, Nietzsche started talking about that I is a product of interpretation, a collection of drives and interpretations rather than a simple and unified object. Now, I would have definitely loved to take, but what happened that as we read further, Nietzsche has not elaborated this argument that, look, I am, therefore I think. And therefore, friends, his argument leaves us in between somewhere without any clinching evidence that, yes, thinking is the most important exercise to evolve a perspective. That is one argument. Now, along with this, we know that actually with Descartes' argument, rationalism was born, and with the rationalism, a very important beginning can be made to understand the reality. But that is not all. We all know that along with René Descartes in his book Discourse or Method, there is John Locke as well. And John Locke, in his work, an essay concerning human understanding, argued about tabula rasa. And he says that at the birth, mind is clean slate. So what is the function of mind? That is also important aspect he has tried to highlight. Now, in this context, what happened that sense perceptions were also, given a very important place for understanding the reality. We all know that every individual, nature has given them the sense perception. And even then, why the intellectuals who are writing now in 21st century or 20th century, they are not taking actually this cognizance that every individual has sense perception. And with that sense perception, and there is also a mind which they can approach to the reality. And it is not only Locke, but if you read Hume, Bacon, they have all tried to argue about the empiricism as the beginning of the reality or reaching to the knowledge. Not only that, Locke is also focusing on measurable qualities of the reality. The measurable qualities of reality are very important. The three qualities which he tries to argue is extension. Matter is basically having an extension. They have numbers and as well as motion. These three qualities can be observed very easily. Now, if we take this context of empiricism, now empiricism is not only a Western philosophical proposition which I want to engage. I want to look at the Indian counterpart also. An Indian counterpart, came in 6th century BC. That has been forgotten at all. Totally forgotten. 6th century BC. 2300 years before John Locke gave his theory of empiricism. And Charvaka can be actually, I am drawing this Charvaka from D.M. Dutt, 6 ways of knowing. Indian 6 ways of knowing. One of the way, out of 9 philosophies of India, there is only one philosophy which talks about empiricism. Rest of 8, they also talk about different other sources, but this philosophy, Charavak, is the only. Pratyaksh mevaha pramanam. That's what actually they are trying to argue, that only perception is the reality. Now, in this here, I want to add, and why I actually am drawn towards Charavaka, because he is also the materialist. He is actually talking about materialism, which is very akin to the today's marginalized sections, because they don't believe in actually salvation, moksha. He is not believing in moksha, and he wants to live this worldly life. And if you want, I can quote this shloka from Vidyarana, Pitva pitva punha pitva. Pitva pitva punha pitva. Drink, drink, drink. पीतवा पीतवा पुनः पीतवा यावत पतति भूतले, गिर जाओ जमीन पर, उसके बाद उत्थावा चाह पुनः पीतवा, उठ करके फिर पियो, पुनर्जन्म न लपटे. That means actually nobody has told us that there is a actually rebirth, and that's where I think this materialism is quite actually related to the subalterns or the excluded communities who do not actually think for the next day. They just dig and drink and then go on. So in that context, I think Charavak becomes a very important resource for us to look at that reality, knowledge can be reached through empiricism. But we all are aware that romantic conservative reaction, I think this is also a very important aspect, because they are very critical of the scientific revolution, and they want to argue that how naive optimism of rationalism, the naive optimism of rationalism of 18th century has created havoc in the lives of the people. Especially they were trying to understand the shortcomings or fallout of the French Revolution. That why did, if that was actually so nice, then why did later on they could not hold? So this democratic way, they wanted to look at that instead of only thinking of rationalism, only thinking on actually, dovetailed structures, we also need to think of the non-rationalist aspects as well. And they exalted emotions, imaginations, and also religion. These three aspects they also brought. And then the poetry, the stories, the short stories, they all became very, very rational actually aspects of the life of the people through which you can understand. And I really draw from this because I think the autobiographies which are coming now, they are really having a lot of facts, or they are having a lot of facts which have not been written, they have not been say mapped by the mainstream social scientists. Now therefore, friends, I draw this forth. The fifth one I draw from Emile Durkheim. And Emile Durkheim, in his book Rules of Sociological Method, argued that the conceptualization of natural and social world is essential for society's existence. Conceptualization of natural and social world is actually essential for societies. If that is the case, that means the marginalized, the tribals, Dalits, the blacks, the Durkheimians, they all have tried to conceptualize the society, natural world as well as social world. I give this example that, especially social world, the taboo. The taboo is very important, and these people, all the marginalized sections, they had tried to conceptualize what is taboo there for them. And that's why they also lived in families. They also actually tried to maintain the relationship. Therefore, friends, I think this conceptualization is also a universal exercise with every population. It is not only some literate people or some educated people, some university visitors can only conceptualize. I think even those people who have not gone to formal sections or formal schooling, they can also conceptualize. And the biggest example comes from Ravidas, who never went to the university, but conceptualized Begumpura, a pura without any sorrows. Therefore, friends, I think there is enough material, social science material, philosophical material, so that each and every person of the sections of society, whether male, female, rural, urban, or race, whatever you want, they all have the capacity to rationalize, they have the capacity for empiricism, they have the capacity to conceptualize, and also they have emotions. Now therefore, there is enough material for evolving a philosophical basis of any perspective you like, whether it is feminist perspective, whether it is tribal, black, minority, whatever perspective. But I think these five aspects are very important as the philosophical basis of the perspective. Now, having given you the basis, the philosophical perspectives, I come to the theoretical aspect of the perspective. यार इतने लोग उत्साहित हो गए कि एक गिलास पानी Those who have been my victim, they know that how I am fond of actually this theoretical perspective, and you all must be remembering now. I begin with C. Wright Mills. C. Wright Mills, the three coordinates of sociological imagination. Now again, I'm trying to argue that how this is not a ideographic statement, it is nomothetic. Every individual, universally, has the capacity to actually reflect on his biography. Even if you go and look at the most illiterate, poor people sitting in a village, or whether he is in slum, you look at how they reflect on their families. Now therefore, this three coordinates of biography, history, and their interaction in society are basically the three coordinates on the basis of which the sociological imagination starts emerging. And therefore, every individual's biography, that's what I was not only quoting the Indian biographies, but I have just tried to look at the biography, the black, very, very, I think, celebrated biography, that is Alex Haley's Roots. Alex Haley's Root, R-O-O-T, Roots. Now, these biographies, they actually give us a lot of unwritten facts which have been obliterated or erased by the mainstream writers. The perspective with which they write their biographies, that is also very important, and that may not be able to be incorporated by the mainstream social scientists. I am only reminded of, one perspective, that is functionalist perspective. If you look the biographies which have been, produced in Indian society, especially the Dalit autobiographies I am talking about here. Take Murdaiya. Take Murdaiya by Tulsi Ram and read the description of the Indian village. What is that? The way village has been described. You read Juthan also. In Juthan also, Om Prakash Valmiki, how he is trying to define his village where he lived. Or you take Chandya Rukh from Punjabi autobiography, what the village he is trying to define. Or you take biography of Veeramma by Racine and Racine in Tamil Nadu. What is the village description she is giving? I think most of the autobiographies which have been produced, or biographies which have been produced, if you read them properly, the functionalist perspective gets deconstructed. There is no, actually, functionalism there. There is no solidarity they are trying to have. And that was later on, in 1972, 78, was endorsed by C. Parthamma in her write-up, Remembered Village, a Brahmanical Odyssey. You can download free of cost from online, I think. Now, this actually, this first proposition I'm just trying to talk about is C. Wright Mills' three coordinates which give us the sociological imagination. And I think, anybody who is trying to write the perspective, they have the capacity of imagination. That's what the point I was trying to actually put to you. The second person I have taken, Berger and Luckmann, and their book, The Social Construction of Reality. The Social Construction of Reality. And this, there they introduced a very important proposition, and that is the location of the researcher has a bearing on the construction of consciousness. The location in the social structure. The location of researcher in the social structure has a bearing on the construction of consciousness, out of which production of knowledge takes place. So reality is socially constructed. Sociology of knowledge perspective is a simple argument. But that actually are, these two arguments get strengthened by the third one, and that is Bourdieu. P. Bourdieu, the cultural capital. I think all the aspects, I'm not going to look into, you want, I think you can look at the embodied state, the objectified state, and the institutionalized state. They really can help us to understand that how. Now what is that? What is the impact of these three? If we look at these three aspects, three theoretical premises. One is the biography, history, and the interaction in society. Another, the social determination of thought, the existential determination of thought by Pierre Bourdieu and Luckmann. And the third is the cultural capital embodied in other things. If you club these three, then what do we get? What conclusion we can draw? There is a population which is born with the cultural capital, and there is a population which is devoid of the mainstream cultural capital. So there are two types of population which we get. Some people have accumulation of cultural capital, and some people are deprived or excluded from the mainstream cultural capital. Now, if we look at this, then what the conclusion is? Some people's construction of consciousness is taking place with the accumulation of the cultural capital. And that's why the functionalist perspective is very easily to be understood. But sometimes, or the people, they have, excluded from the cultural capital. And therefore, friends, there is always deconstruction of the center. Now, it is here, therefore, I bring in my fourth theoretical paradigm, and this is Thomas Kuhn. And Thomas Kuhn is trying to argue, I'm reading with Romila Thapar, the historian. You also do some history, ma'am. So, Romila Thapar argues that researches are not only made by data collection, but they can also be made by changing paradigm. So if you are talking about certain aspect which is center for you, for me it is not. And that's what I was giving example of the village. For some people, wanted Gram Swaraj. But what Ambedkar said, it is den of ignorance. Why? Because the experiential reality changes. And therefore, friends, paradigm of research also changes. The paradigm of research, when it will change, the questions will change. And the question and interaction will change. Now, it is here that I think we can add, if you really were interested, the post-modernist argument given by Lyotard. Francois Lyotard, he is very clear, and he is trying to argue that there is incredulity of the metanarratives. How metanarratives have been actually, flashed. And under that, the carpet of that metanarrative, the little histories have been silenced. The little histories have been silenced under the metanarratives. And therefore, those histories, those stories, they have to be dug out. They have to be dug out if we really want to understand. Therefore, friend, this particular perspective with this, paradigm which I'm talking about, that change the center and try to create another center, has lot of meaning when we add one more person, and this is Paulo Freire. Pedagogy of the oppressed will be written by the oppressed. Is oppressor ready to write an emancipatory agenda? And therefore it is the function, or it is the right of the oppressed to write and not only emancipate himself, but also emancipate the oppressor. Now, you know that how Paulo Freire, and why did Paulo Freire write Pedagogy of the Oppressed? The story behind, if you read his biography, you will come to know that. Now, in this context, these 7 people, they also provide us the theoretical paradigm. Okay, having given you the philosophical and theoretical paradigm, there are 2 more important aspects that you need to do if you really want to evolve a perspective. One, that you need to define the characteristics of the population with whom you are going to engage the research. Without evolving the proper characteristics, you will not be able to know the boundaries of the population to whom you are talking. And I actually look at the way people have tried to define one term, Dalits. Everyone is a Dalit now. Any poor people is a Dalit. Any marginalized section is a Dalit. Oh, I'm also poor because I don't have money. But if you really try to look at the characteristics, and when I was looking at, now this is part of the new book, Dalit Studies, which is very, I tried to define Dalits through 6 characteristics. Those who are doing the research. And I am taking this actually, how do I define? It is not only in the air. Rather, I have tried to draw again from Imai Durkheim, who says that science doesn't observe the heat, but it is not necessary that science cannot study heat. So if science can not observe heat, but yet they can heat, how? They can study heat through essentialism, the rise of mercury in the thermometer, and then you actually draw from there. So I am trying to also, I cannot see Dalits, but I can study Dalit by evolving the characteristics. And in that characteristics, these characteristics are, I'm beginning with the structural location. And I drawing the structures definition from S.F. Nadel. S.F. Nadel argued that structure is nothing but permutation and combination established in the society. The roles and statuses. The permutation and combination of roles and statuses established in the society is nothing but structure. So I'm taking that the roles and statuses. What are the roles and statuses which have been given to the Dalits? And therefore, I think structure very important characteristics. What is the structural location? This structural location leads to cumulative exclusion. That is the second characteristic. Cumulative exclusion. Exclusion is not only in one sphere of life as the proletariat is. He may be deprived of his purchasing power. But what about his social power? So therefore, friends, cumulative. And if you read my book, I'm also advertising for my books, the new book. I have made 44 types of exclusion suffered by the Dalits. The table is there, you can look at it. So it is cumulative exclusion. The third, the long history of exclusion. This is not a history of a year or 2 year or 10 year or decade or century. It is millennium old history. That. The fourth aspect is an unalterable social identity. Despite of economic and political mobility or social mobility, the identity remains the same. Whether it is actually, President of India, or whether it is Chief Justice of India, whether it is Professor of India or a Doctor of India, a Dalit is always a Dalit. The fifth is a distinctive construction of consciousness, because of which there is unique iconography, symbols of greeting and celebration. combine these characteristics, then you can reach a population who is known as Dalit. Now, people have said, okay, poverty-stricken people are Dalit, women are Dalit, tribals are Dalit. Now, is that an academic exercise which we are involved? This may be a political exercise, good, because they wanted a huge Dalit population because they can vote, fine. But academically, I think we need to restrain, actually. The last aspect is basically if we really want to evolve a perspective, we need to discussion, or we need to evolve a population with the important characteristics. That is one. Second, the subject matter. What will be the subject matter, and how you are drawing to evolve the subject matter? Usually, when I look at the population, they are not, the internality of the population is not defined. The internal groupings on the gender, on the age, on the youth. And it is no coincidence if you look the Patricia Hill Collins, how is she trying to define the women experience in America, and how in India Vijayashree, the Priyadarshini Vijayashree, how they are trying to define the characteristics. They all say that if the general caste woman is exploited on the basis of gender and class, then the Dalit woman is actually deprived in three aspects. Gender, class and caste. And their gender, class and race all have actually triple exclusion or triple type of exploitation. Now why this comes? This category comes because there is a minute observation on the experiential reality of the population, and on that basis you have evolved the characteristics. Therefore, friends, I think if you evolve a subject matter with these characteristics, there will be proper contours of the population, or the boundaries of the population, where one begins and one ends. You may have continuum, no problem, but at least you will be satisfied that, look, we have been able to done. The last aspect is, I think I said already last, but I think I left. This is the functions of the perspectives. What will be the function? Functions, perspective is not only end in itself. It is a means to an end. What is that end? That is evolving function. Now, I have tried to look at the 6 types of functions which a perspective should have. You can evolve number of others, but one very important aspect the perspective does, it traces the history and origin of the knowledge production. Since when the knowledge production is started in a population. I know that it's very difficult by an individual person, but I think if you have collective wisdom, you can look at since when this knowledge production is started. The second, identifying the allied perspectives. The allied perspective that share similar epistemological positions. And the third, exposing the erasures, distortions, reductionism by the mainstream knowledge. How the erasures, how the distortions, reductionism, stigmatization of the population, the other, has taken place in the mainstream. Fifth, developing an alternative framework to understand the mainstream reality. I think you also have, when you have a perspective, you also have that how others have tried to look at you, you also look at them, how you are going to evolve. Last, there should be more inclusive understanding of Indian society as a whole. I think, we have I am here taking actually from Adorno that it is not only that we have to understand the reality, we have to also give way out. Usually in our center, they don't give way out. But the last point which I was thinking, that yes, we have a hope, ray of hope. I think this hope has to be also given from the perspective that once the alternative perspective has been established, they will try to give us their own findings, there will be their own reality. And second, you already have a mainstream reality. Now, if we can draw a mean of these two realities, can we draw a mean of the two realities? One exaggerated or one actually is trying to deconstruct. If we can take mean of these two realities, I think we can give a more rational reality to the understanding of Indian society. I think we will also contribute into the development of the knowledge. Thank you.